The sound still echoes. Metal striking tile. Dream shattering glass. That was the night my father taught me where I belong. But before the crash, there were gifts. And hope. I'm Casey Miller, 32, hotel senior manager. I came home after 3 months of silence, carrying peace offerings. A work coat for Dad's night shifts. Cookware for Mom. A watch for Jack, my brother. A truce wrapped in tissue paper. Dad didn't see gifts, he saw betrayal. Jack saw weakness. Mom saw the floor. I saw the same battlefield I'd grown up on. Every compliment a trap, every success a crime. By the time I unzipped my laptop bag, I already knew what would break before the night ended. If you've ever faced this kind of homecoming, you're not alone. Some houses don't need fire to burn you alive. My living room smells like beer and resentment. Jack leans against the counter, half grin, half warning. Mom hovers near the sink, pretending to clean a spotless plate. Dad's voice cuts through the air, sharp and rusted. Hotel money makes you feel rich enough to forget your roots. Heat climbs my neck, but I keep my voice even. It's not about money, Dad. It's about progress. He snorts. Progress is just pride with lipstick on. The same words he used when I mentioned college. When I said scholarship, he said betrayal. When I said degree, he said disgrace. I learned young. Ambition sounds like rebellion in this house. Jack raises his beer. Cheers to our fancy sister. The bottle clinks too loud against the table. Mom doesn't speak, doesn't defend, doesn't look. Her silence screams louder than any insult. I try to show them the laptop screen, my renovation proposal, my months of sleepless nights. Dad doesn't see effort. He sees distance. He sees me becoming someone he can't control. That's what scares him. When you come from people who fear change, every dream feels like disobedience. Mom's hands tremble around the cookware box. You're always working, she says softly. We barely see you. The guilt lands like a stone in my ribs. No matter how much I give, it's never the right thing. I offer warmth, they ask for blood. When did love become a ledger with no credit column? Jack laughs again, a hollow sound. Still trying to prove you're better than us? Pathetic. The word settles like dust on broken glass. I breathe in the quiet humiliation. And I know this night isn't about celebration. It's a setup waiting for its climax. Every step forward meets a familiar wrecking crew. Silence swells thick as syrup after the laughter dies. I adjust my laptop, steadying the screen with trembling fingers. Mom busies herself stacking the torn wrapping paper. Dad exhales smoke through his nose like a furnace. This presentation matters to me, I say softly. He doesn't answer, just eyes the glowing keyboard like it's treason. The cursor blinks, a pulse of defiance. For weeks, I've built this project slide by slide. Renovation plans that could double occupancy by winter. I thought maybe showing them would bridge the gap. Stupid, maybe. But hope is hard to kill when it's been trained to survive. Jack leans forward, beer sloshing onto the carpet. You really think those suits respect you? They'll drop you the moment profits dip. I smile, brittle. I've heard this sermon before. Dad mutters something about real work again. His voice holds the tired anger of a man outpaced by time. He fears irrelevance more than failure. That's the curse passed down through generations. Better to crush a dream than face your own smallness. I watch his hands, scarred, steady, familiar. The same hands that built my first bike, then sold it for bills. Love in this family always came with receipts. I take a breath, one of those deep ones therapists describe. Slow in, slower out. You can't reason with a wound that never healed. Mom finally speaks, barely above a whisper. Your aunt called. She's proud of you. Dad's head snaps toward her. We don't need her approval, he growls. The air crackles with something unspoken and ancient. Aunt Annie. The family heretic who left and never looked back. The woman who taught me that peace is worth distance. I cling to that thought like a rope in rising water. Jack taps the face of his new watch. You'll be late for your fancy meeting tomorrow. His smirk lands like a bruise. I start packing up, carefully sliding the laptop into its sleeve. You should stay, Mom says. It's still early. I almost laugh. Early for what, another round? Instead, I swallow the question. The house hums with old ghosts. Cigarettes, beer, and bitter inheritance. At the door, I pause. Dad watches from his chair, unreadable. Good luck, he says, tone flat as tin. It almost sounds like love if you don't listen closely. Outside, the air feels too clean, too quiet. A nightbird cries from somewhere distant, lonely, misplaced, alive. I think of Annie's porch light always left on for me. Not everyone who leaves forgets where they came from. Some just refuse to drown with the ship. I grip the laptop tighter. This machine holds everything they don't understand. My hours, my worth, my proof. In families like mine, progress is provocation. Respect is rebellion. His hands close on my future. Mine close on proof. The word pathetic still rings in my ears when he moves. Quick. Sudden. Like a switch flipped inside his chest. Before I can react, his hand closes around my laptop. Dad, stop. The metal scrapes against the table. Then the world cracks open. Plastic splinters. Glass blooms across the carpet. The sound slices through me sharper than the impact. Weeks of work, gone in one breath. My body moves before my mind catches up. I drop to my knees, gathering broken fragments. Each piece reflects a warped version of my face. Jack chuckles, beer dripping from his fingers. Now you'll learn real work. Mom gasps but doesn't move. She's always been better at mourning than defending. I photograph the wreckage through trembling hands. Click. Another angle. Another truth preserved. Dad frowns, thrown by my call. What are you doing? Protecting evidence, I say. His confusion hardens back into anger. You think you're better than us because of that machine? I don't answer. Instead, I slide the receipt beside the shattered screen. 6 payments left. Paid with hope and overtime. He doesn't see it. He never does. The smell of burnt circuits hangs in the air. I rise slowly, knees stiff, voice steady. You didn't just break a computer, Dad. You broke trust that never had a chance to grow. He looks away, jaw tight, eyes suddenly older. The anger is only armor for fear. For the first time, I see it clearly. He's terrified of being replaced. By me, by progress. Mom whispers, Charles, please. But her loyalty is muscle memory. I grab my bag, the ruined laptop inside. I should go before the apology turns into another accusation. Outside, the night is cool and clear. I drive to Aunt Annie's house without planning to. Her porch light waits, like always. She opens the door before I can knock. Oh, honey. The words collapse me. I lay the broken computer on her kitchen table. She studies the damage like a doctor reading scans, then disappears and returns with an old laptop, slow but alive. They can break things, but not you, she says. Her hands are steady. Mine finally stop shaking. I log in, holding my breath. Everything's backed up to the company drive. Relief hits so hard I almost laugh. Annie brews coffee, the kitchen smelling like cinnamon and safety. We sit side by side, rebuilding slide by slide. Her silver hair catches the lamp glow like armor. Outside, dawn presses against the windows, pale and forgiving. The new file saves with a soft digital sigh. When the sun rises, the presentation shines brighter than before. Loss sharpened it. Grief edited it. Resilience designed it. They broke the tool. They didn't touch the work. The lobby doors slide open, and my stomach drops. My father's best hat. My mother's church dress. Jack trailing behind like a guilty echo. Not here, not now. 3 days since I cut them off, and they've invaded my world. Charles Miller doesn't yell, he performs. There she is, our hotel manager daughter. Heads turn. My coworkers glance up, confused. The marble floor gleams, reflecting chaos I can't let spread. Mom steps forward, voice trembling on cue. We've been trying to reach you, sweetheart. This isn't love, it's theater. I'm working, I say evenly. Is there something urgent? Dad drapes an arm around Mom, rehearsed sympathy in every motion. We just wanted to invite you to Thanksgiving, he says loudly. Whole family's coming. Everyone's asking why you've abandoned us. Abandoned. The word lands like a slap, perfectly timed for the audience. Daniel, my director, appears beside me, hand outstretched. Wonderful to meet your parents, Casey. Dad beams, shifting into charm mode. She's always been our pride, he says. Jack adds, we're really proud of her. Their sincerity would fool anyone who hadn't lived the truth. Daniel smiles politely. You never mentioned family visits. It was meant to be a surprise, Dad replies. Then softer to me. The mill's closing, we need your help. Mom's tears shimmer like glass. The bills keep piling up. A few guests whisper nearby. This is their arena, public guilt. But they don't know I've rehearsed this scene. Why don't we continue in the conference room? I suggest. Daniel nods. My father hesitates, then follows. Inside, the air thickens with performance and power. Dad opens first, voice heavy with false regret. Our daughter's been under stress. She's making choices that worry us. Daniel turns to me. Casey? I slide a folder across the table. Photos. Receipts. Proof. This is what stress looks like, I say calmly. Images of the smashed laptop, time-stamped. Records of payments for their bills. Emails from Mom requesting money the same night. Their faces drain color in sync. Annie enters quietly, carrying my forgotten lunch. Her presence steadies me. Daniel studies the photos. his expression hardening. Destroying property? Harassing staff? He asks sharply. My father sputters. That's family business. No, I say, meeting his eyes. This is boundary business. Silence stretches like glass about to crack. Daniel stands. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, this ends now. Security waits at the door. Mom whispers, we just needed help. I nod once. So did I. Their footsteps fade down the hall. Annie's hand squeezes mine. Daniel exhales. You handled that better than most executives. I look at the empty doorway. They came to humiliate me. They left educated instead. 3 weeks later, the air feels different. Quieter. Lighter. Mine. My mornings no longer start with dread. They start with peace. And coffee I actually taste. The hotel awarded me Employee of the Quarter last Friday. Daniel handed me the plaque himself. Not for survival. For leadership. I didn't cry until I was alone. Sometimes freedom feels heavier than chains ever did. Annie waits for me on her porch every Tuesday now. 2 glasses of lemonade between rocking chairs. Our new ritual. I tell her about therapy appointments, small victories, nights I finally sleep. She just nods, her eyes saying everything words can't. When she laughs, it sounds like sunlight. You built your own peace, she says. Brick by brick. I smile. I learned from you. At work, people stop me in the hall. They say I inspire them. But inspiration wasn't the goal. Survival was. Now thriving is. On weekends, I teach budgeting classes at the community center, helping others cut loose from guilt that looks like love. Jack texted last week. He's taking night classes too. Maybe cycles can break if someone dares to stop spinning. The apartment feels like a sanctuary now. No shouting, no shame. Just me, my work, and silence that doesn't hurt. I pour coffee, glance at my framed photo. Me and Aunt Annie. Mid-laugh. Below it, a note in her handwriting. They broke things, not you. I whisper it sometimes when mornings feel heavy. Because healing isn't loud. It's quiet, stubborn, and entirely mine. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself from someone else's destruction, remember this, your worth doesn't need witnesses. But your peace deserves protection. Have you ever faced something like this? Wherever you're watching from, morning coffee or late night quiet, I'd like to hear your story in the comments. And if this one stayed with you, subscribe to join a community that believes strength isn't silence. It's knowing when to speak.
Marie, we've decided it's best you skip Christmas this year. Lindsay is hosting. We want something low-key. That was it. No greeting, no punctuation, no warmth. The message came from my mother, Diane Callahan, and it lit up my phone screen just as I was pulling a sheet of cranberry scones from the oven. The kitchen still smelled like orange zest and cinnamon. The window above the sink, the one Thomas had installed 2 winters before he passed, reflected my stunned expression in the fading afternoon light. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. Instead, I turned off the oven, set the scones on the cooling rack, and stared at the message again slowly, as if it might change with time or softness. I reread it once more, then let the phone fall face down on the counter. For 20 years, I had hosted Christmas. My home, our cabin in Vermont, was the gathering place, the place of firelight and handmade stockings of roast duck and mulled wine of carols on the record player and snow tracked in on boots. After Thomas died, I kept the tradition going. Maybe I clung too hard. Maybe it became my armor. But now, my family was asking me not to come at all. Not because I had done something wrong, but because, as they always phrased it, you just go too far with things. My younger sister, Lindsay Callahan, had never hosted. She was 15 years my junior and currently engaged to a man named Connor Hayes, who I'd only met once. She lived in a sleek 2-bedroom condo in Boston with concrete walls, LED lighting, and a refrigerator that talked. It was modern, minimalist, quiet. She called it peaceful. I always thought it felt like a hotel you couldn't quite afford. I wiped my hands on the dish towel, red and green plaid frayed from years of use, and picked up the phone again. A second message had arrived. Don't take it the wrong way, Marie Mom had followed up. You know how intense you get about the holidays. Intense. They always used that word like it was an accusation. When I built out the old woodshed into a warm guest room, they said I was intense. When I made place cards with hand-pressed sprigs of rosemary, they called it intense. When I organized a 12-dish menu and made every pie crust from scratch, it wasn't devotion, it was too much. Never mind that they showed up year after year. Ate every bite, took leftovers home in foil. Sat by the fire in the very house they now said was too far. I scrolled down and typed a reply. Understood. Enjoy your peace. I surprised myself with how steady my fingers felt. I didn't defend. I didn't explain. I didn't ask to come anyway. Instead, I walked to the cedar hutch in the corner of the dining room and opened the second drawer. Inside was a worn leather notebook, edges curled, pages stained from old cranberry sauce. I opened it to the bookmarked page. Final Christmas at the Cabin draft menu. I had already been planning it quietly. This was going to be my last year hosting anyway. The cabin was too much to keep up alone. The heating bills, the roof repairs, the long winters. But if this was how it ended if I wasn't welcome, then I would still make something of it. Just not for them. I stood by the window watching snow begin to drift down through the bare trees and whispered half to myself, half to the past. Then this year. I'll make Christmas for someone who still wants it. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed with the quilt pulled to my chin, listening to the groan of the old radiator and the whisper of wind against the window panes. Thomas used to call it the lullaby of December, this blend of metal and wind and snow. Around 3 a.m, I got up, patted downstairs in wool socks, and lit the stove. The kitchen felt different now. Not empty exactly. More like a stage after the curtain had fallen. I set the kettle on and opened the notebook again. Over the past few weeks, I'd been drafting menus. Nothing extravagant. Just something meaningful. I called the section Final Christmas at the Cabin. At first, I thought maybe I'd invite neighbors or some friends from the library, or even just make a meal for myself and set an extra place for Thomas. But the longer I sat there sipping tea in the low light, the more certain I became. Sheila Dawson. I reached for my phone. Sheila and I had worked together on a few local community projects, mostly Thanksgiving meal deliveries and coat drives. She was the director of Maplewood House, a small independent living facility a few towns over. Not fancy, not sad either, just modest and forgotten, like a place meant to hold what the world no longer made room for. She picked up after 2 rings, her voice thick with sleep. Marie, is everything okay? I know it's last minute, I said. But if there are any residents who won't have family visiting for Christmas, I'd like to invite them here. I'll cook. I'll handle everything. There was a long pause, then the rustling of sheets. You serious? As serious as I've ever been. Sheila's voice softened. 12, maybe 14. That's how many usually get left behind. You'd really do this? I'm not hosting family this year, I said simply. But I still have a table. I still have a fire. Seems wrong to let it go cold. Another pause. You know they still talk about the cinnamon rolls you brought on Veterans Day. One man cried. I smiled. Then he's getting his own pan this time. We agreed on the date Christmas Eve, and I promised to follow up in a few days with details. After we hung up, I sat for a long time in the quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't ache. The next morning, I pulled out the green linen box from the hall closet, the one marked Decorations Keep. Inside were my favorites, the wooden angel Thomas carved the year we married, a collection of velvet ribbon, brass candle holders from my mother back when she still sent gifts. I ran my fingers over the angel's face. The paint was chipped now, but the expression still gentle. I said it aloud, though no one was there to hear. We'll do it differently this year. I made a list. Meals, table settings, coat sizes, how to make space for walkers between the chairs. I checked the radiator in the guest rooms. I moved the furniture in the dining room to accommodate a longer table. I rearranged the pantry and cleared a shelf in the fridge. Every step brought something back into the house I hadn't realized had gone missing. I didn't tell anyone in the family. They'd made it clear I wasn't needed, so I gave myself to those who still were. By the end of that week, I'd stripped the beds in the guest rooms, set up a folding cot in the study, and scheduled a chimney sweep. The house smelled of orange peels simmering in cloves and old wood polish. The snow outside had settled into its mid-December crust, the kind that held footprints just long enough to remind you someone had passed through. On Thursday afternoon, while I was pressing napkins and setting aside extra gloves for guests who might come unprepared, my phone buzzed on the counter. I glanced at the screen. Diane Callahan. I let it go to voicemail. Then, out of instinct or maybe muscle memory, I opened the family group chat. There were 2 new messages from Lindsay Callahan. Hey, what does everyone think about catering the ovens acting up? Connor's not thrilled about having the whole family in the condo, but we'll make it work. No one replied. That night, the phone rang again. I picked it up before I could talk myself out of it. Mom didn't bother with pleasantries. Marie, you're not mad, are you? You've been so quiet. I'm fine, I said. You know how overwhelming you can make things. We just thought it was time for something simpler. I understand, Mom. There was a pause. You sure you're not upset I've made other plans? I could hear her blink, could feel the weight of her trying to read what I wasn't saying. Well, Lindsay's doing her best. It's just a small place and Connor likes peace. He doesn't like chaos. Of course, I said. Then I'm sure you'll all have a peaceful time. She paused again, unsure whether to press or retreat. All right then, talk soon. We didn't. 2 days later, I got a call from Jenna Dawson-Sheila's niece and a journalism student at the state college. She'd heard about the Christmas dinner from her aunt and wanted to write a human interest piece for the community paper. At first, I hesitated. My instinct is always to keep things quiet, but Jenna promised the story would focus on the residents, not me. People forget them, she said. Your dinner's giving them something to look forward to. Her voice reminded me of a younger Lindsay before the world wore down her softness. I agreed. On Monday, Jenna arrived with a scarf tied around her hair and a camera slung over one shoulder. She wandered the kitchen and living room, taking photos of the long farmhouse table I'd borrowed from Sheila's basement and the dried orange slices I'd hung from the windows with ribbon. She was particularly struck by the memory tree, the idea I'd pulled from one of Thomas's old journals. Each guest would hang an ornament in honor of someone they missed. It's beautiful, she said, her eyes misting. It's like grief and hope holding hands. I didn't say much. I just nodded and kept zesting oranges. That evening, after she left, I checked the family thread again. Marie Lindsay had written, Are you ignoring us? Mom said you're being dramatic. I need a head count for catering. And Connor wants to know if anyone has dairy issues. I closed the app. There was a time I would have scrambled to help. Would have typed up 3 menu options, offered to cook something anyway, or at least gently guided my sister through her first hosting attempt. But that time had passed. Outside, the porch lights glowed against the snow. Inside, my hands smelled of rosemary and flour. I pressed another batch of sugar cookie dough into stars and trees, then labeled each container with a guest's name and a smiley face sticker I found in the back of a drawer. By morning, the article was live online. 1 table, 12 guests, and a cabin full of memory. It made the front page of the local section. I didn't send the link to anyone, but I knew they'd see it. By the end of the second week, my hands were dry from flour, my back ached from rearranging furniture, and my kitchen table was covered in a sea of name tags and cloth napkins. But for the first time in years, the ache wasn't hollow. It had weight, purpose, warmth. The memory tree stood in the corner of the living room just beside the bay window where Thomas used to sip coffee and watch the snowfall. This year, I'd strung it with twine and tiny paper ornaments, each blank, for now ready to be filled in by the guests. Sheila had sent me a list of names and short bios handwritten in her careful upright script. Howard, 82, former postman. Lost his wife 6 Christmases ago. No children. Marlene, 91, avid knitter. Used to sing in her church choir. No surviving relatives. Mr. Katz, 78, Wayutue historian. Estranged from his only daughter. 12 in total, each carrying more years than most people bother to count. I took out a fresh pen and began writing their names on cardstock. 1 per plate. The tree wasn't for decoration. It was a place for what didn't get spoken aloud anymore. Each guest would hang a name, a prayer, a wish, a memory. It was grief, yes, but stitched through with something softer. Hope, maybe, or dignity. Outside the porch, railings glittered with snow-dusted garlands. I'd wrapped them in warm lights that flickered just enough to feel alive. Inside, the dining room held 3 mismatched tables pushed together and covered with an old ivory cloth that had belonged to my grandmother. I'd sewn the edges after Thanksgiving, patching tiny tears like a quilter fixing time. The day before Christmas Eve, I baked in shifts. Dinner rolls, pecan pie, roasted sweet potatoes. I slow-cooked a cider blend with cloves and orange peel. Every few hours, I stepped outside to cool my face, take in the scent of pine and chimney smoke. Mid-afternoon, a knock at the door startled me. It was Jenna again, scarf tied tighter this time, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Sorry to drop in," she said, holding up a small wrapped package. "Just wanted to give you this." I invited her in. She handed me a book, The Gift of Years by Joan Chittister. Inside was a note for the woman who remembers what the rest of the world forgot. Jay. I didn't trust my voice enough to speak, so I just nodded. She took a few more photos, then lingered by the memory tree. "It doesn't feel like charity in here," she said. "It feels like belonging." Later, after she left, I stood alone in the quiet and adjusted the chair placements once more, making sure no one would feel isolated. I tested the path between rooms for anyone using a walker. I set aside slippers in different sizes and folded throw blankets on each guest bed. That night, I found Thomas's old cufflinks in a drawer, silver snowflakes he wore every year for the Christmas toast. I set them by the mirror in the guest bath, unsure why. Just needing them closed, maybe. The cabin no longer felt like it was waiting for something. It felt like it was preparing. I woke on Christmas Eve before the sun lit every candle in the house and placed a bundle of cedar and lavender on the hearth. Then I opened the fridge, rolled up my sleeves, and got back to work. It was nearly 5 o'clock when the knock came. I was in the kitchen tying a ribbon around the cider ladle when the sound pulled me still. I knew it wasn't one of the residents. They weren't due until 6, and Sheila always called first. I walked to the front door and peeked through the side window. It was Diane, my mother. Frank, my father, stood just behind her, his wool coat dusted with snow, and off to the side, arms crossed and shoulders hunched, was Lindsay. They hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't warned. I opened the door but didn't step back. Diane offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We were in the area," she said. I said nothing. She glanced past me into the glowing warmth of the house, the fireplace lit candles flickering the long table already set. She spotted the memory tree and blinked too fast. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Frank cleared his throat. "We saw the article. That story what you're doing here." "It's something." Lindsay spoke last. "We didn't know it would mean this much to you." I looked at her then. She wasn't being cruel. She was just young in ways that had nothing to do with age. I let my hand rest on the doorframe. "You didn't have to know. You just had to not take it away." Silence stretched thick and cold. Diane stepped forward slightly. "We thought you needed rest, that you were pushing too hard again. Every year you make such a production out of things we thought that I should be quiet. I finished. Less. So you could have peace." My voice didn't rise. I wasn't angry. I was just tired of trimming myself down to fit. Frank shifted awkwardly. "Lindsay's party didn't go quite as planned." "No," I said. I imagine it didn't. The wind stirred behind them. Snowflakes caught in Diane's scarf. She looked suddenly older. "You've made something special here, Marie. Something real." I nodded once. "Yes, I have." From the kitchen, a timer chimed softly. Behind me, the scent of roasted squash filled the air, and the memory tree shimmered with names and blank ornaments waiting to be filled. "I should get back," I said. Diane looked down. "Of course, we won't stay." I hesitated, then opened the door a little wider, not as an invitation, but as a courtesy. They stood there a moment longer, unsure. Then Lindsay reached into her coat pocket and handed me a small envelope. "From Connor," she said. He read the article, too. He wanted to donate something, or help if you need volunteers. I took it and gave a small nod. "Thank you." No hugs, no big gestures, but as they turned to leave, I saw Diane reach out and touch the porch railing just lightly, as if trying to remember something she'd once loved and forgotten how to hold. The guests began arriving just after 6. One by one, they stepped in from the cold cheeks, flushed eyes wide, some walking slowly with canes or arms looped through volunteers. I greeted each by name, handed them cider, helped hang coats. Laughter rose quickly, tentative at first, then full. The dining room glowed. The memory tree had begun to fill paper ornaments swinging gently from its branches, names, handwritten messages, a few small photographs clipped to twine. Some guests stood by it longer than others, fingers trembling as they tied a ribbon or smoothed a note against a branch. I was refilling water pitchers when Sheila tapped me on the shoulder. "Come outside for a second," she said softly. I followed her to the porch where Howard, one of our oldest guests, stood bundled in a navy pea coat. His hands were clasped, and next to him stood a young woman no more than 25 with dark hair and tear-bright eyes. "This is my granddaughter," he said, voice low. We hadn't spoken in over a decade. Sheila leaned in. She read the article. The young woman stepped forward. "I didn't even know he was still in Vermont. I searched your name, saw the story, and I just drove." Howard blinked quickly, then looked at me. I didn't think I'd ever see her again. For a moment, none of us spoke. There was only the soft hush of falling snow and the golden warmth pouring from the windows behind us. Then Diane's voice floated from the doorway. "Marie." I turned. She stood there holding a mug of cider, eyes rimmed red. She'd come in quietly after all. I hadn't seen her enter. She looked at Howard and his granddaughter, then back at me. "You didn't just decorate a house," she said. "You brought people home." I nodded. There wasn't anything else to say. Diane stepped closer. "We were wrong. About this. About you." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked to the memory tree, picked up the ornament I'd kept in my apron pocket all evening when I hadn't dared to hang. Thomas Callahan, 1949-2012. I tied it to the lowest branch just above the small string of wooden bells he'd carved our third Christmas together. Then I turned back to her. "Would you like to stay?" Diane nodded, pressing her hand to her mouth. That night she helped me serve the pie. Morning came softly, the kind of hush only fresh snow can make. The guests had gone, some back to Maplewood with full bellies and wrapped leftovers, others driven home by volunteers. All except Howard, who stayed behind to have coffee with his granddaughter. I didn't ask how long she planned to stay. It didn't feel like my place. It felt like grace. I stood in the dining room, mug in hand, watching the embers settle in the hearth. The memory tree twinkled quietly, now full. Some ornaments tilted, others hung just so. I let my fingers trail the edge of one Betty, 1963. "I miss your laugh." Behind me, the soft rattle of dishes. Lindsay had risen early and was setting the table with quiet precision, nothing fancy, just folded napkins and warmed bread. Frank read from a paper scrap someone had left by the tree, a poem about finding family in unlikely places. Diane poured coffee. Her movements were slow but certain, the same way I remembered from winters when she still wore aprons and called us in from sledding. We ate together, no speeches, no tension. Just the scrape of forks, the crackle of fire, the scent of maple sausage and rosemary. Before they left, Diane touched my shoulder. "Next year," she said, "if you're up for it, we'd like to come again." I nodded. "This house may not be mine much longer." "Then maybe," she said, "it can be all of ours. Just once more." As they stepped outside, I walked back to the tree. Snow fell past the window in slow, drifting flakes, and I thought of Thomas, of his steady hands, his quiet pride in making things that lasted. Some traditions, I realized, don't end. They just change shape. Spring comes softly in Eugene. The light filters through my kitchen window like it's remembering something. I watch it crawl across the old tile floor, warming the cracks between grout lines I've scrubbed clean more times than I care to count. No one's tracking in dirt anymore, but I still mop. It's a ritual now. Something about the motion, the warm water, the clean scent, it quiets the corners of the day. The house creaks when it shifts, like bones settling into sleep. The refrigerator hums in a familiar rhythm, almost like a purr. I live alone, but I'm not lonely. This quiet, this stillness, it's mine. I built it. Not all at once, and not without cost, but it holds. Sometimes, though, when the wind dies down and the morning is too still, the quiet pulls something loose. It carries me back, not in a dramatic flash, but in pieces. The weight of a chair scraping tile, a door closing just a little too hard. A voice. "You'll never be more than a burden." That's the line that always returns. It wasn't shouted. That would have been easier somehow. No, it was said like a fact. Like gravity. Something I was supposed to just accept. I did for a while. I don't remember what I said back. Maybe nothing. Maybe I laughed. I used to do that a lot, laugh when I didn't understand the joke. Now I let the memory pass through me like weather. I pick up my mug, the chipped one with the faded sunflowers. I take it to the sink and rinse it out slowly the way you do when you have nowhere to be and all the time in the world. From the back window I can see the garden. Basil's already poking through. Tomatoes will come next. I whisper to the leaves sometimes not because I think they understand, but because I need to hear my voice in this house. I don't talk to many people these days, not since I stopped trying to be heard. There's peace in that too. But some things don't stay buried. Some voices return when you least expect them. And some knocks at the door don't come with warnings. 15 years ago, I was 49 and in between everything. In between jobs, in between apartments, in between being the kind of daughter they wanted and the kind I could survive being. I'd just left another office job marketing assistant for a place that sold ergonomic chairs. My department got folded into some out-of-state team, and my name didn't make the new chart. Severance covered 2 months. After that, I started driving for errands, watching older neighbors' dogs, writing a blog at night that nobody read yet. I told my mother Mary Ann over the phone one afternoon. She was folding laundry, I could hear it in the background. She didn't say anything until I said the word writing. Then she laughed, not cruelly, just tired. Claire, honey, you're almost 50. You need a paycheck, not a poetry journal. A few days later, we gathered for a dinner at my younger brother Matt's house. He'd just gotten promoted district manager at a logistics company. His wife baked a layered cake. My parents brought balloons. I came with a wrapped box. Inside was something I'd stayed up 2 nights making, a hand-bound collection of my blog entries printed and tied with twine. I wrote a note to my mother on the first page. She opened it, smiled thinly, and said, "Oh, sweetie, maybe just keep these private. You know how people judge." Matt snorted. My dad, Frank, sipped his beer and didn't look at me. I took the book back before dessert. The next morning I called and asked if I could stay with them for a while. Just a few weeks until something opened up. The phone was quiet for longer than it should have been. "This family can't keep covering your flops," my father said. "You're not 25 anymore." And that was it. No yelling, no slammed doors. Just silence where love should have been. I moved what I could into my trunk, parked behind the Safeway on 10th Street, and spent the first night trying to sleep between the gear shift and a laundry basket. The second night I cried until the windows fogged. On the third night I took a walk in the dark just to remember what breathing used to feel like. I told myself I was free now, that I'd wanted this anyway, but even as I whispered it, the echo inside the car said something else. "You'll never be more than a burden." I didn't believe it yet. But I hadn't stopped carrying it either. The job came through a friend of a friend. A woman named Lillian Rivera needed part-time help. A stroke had taken most of the strength from her left side, and she didn't want to be sent to a facility. I didn't have formal nursing experience, but I knew how to listen, how to cook, how to sit beside someone without filling the air, just to avoid silence. Lillian's house smelled like cedar and dust and something sweeter, maybe rose water. She was in her late 70s with white hair kept in a loose braid and reading glasses chained around her neck. The first day she handed me a list of tasks and then said, "We'll adjust." We're both learning each other. She called me dear, but not in a patronizing way. More like someone calling out across a quiet room. She let me do the dishes my way. She taught me how to fold fitted sheets with sharp corners. And in the evenings when her hands trembled too much for her books, she let me read aloud. "You have a voice for poetry," she said once, and I laughed, not because I disagreed, but because no one had ever said that before. That was the first time I opened my laptop again. I wrote after she fell asleep. Little things, at first fragments, overheard phrases, stories about long bus rides and tired feet. I posted some of them on the old blog I never shut down. Nobody read them. Until one day someone did. Then 10 people. Then 100. By the end of that year, a small publisher reached out about turning the essays into a collection. I said yes, though. My hands shook when I signed the contract. Lillian clapped when I told her. "Make a space for yourself, Claire," she said. "Don't wait for someone to offer one." 3 years passed in a rhythm I came to cherish. Breakfast at 7, pills at 8, a short walk when the weather allowed, then book soup silence. I stayed longer than I was paid to. I didn't keep track. When Lillian died, it was on a Tuesday during her nap. I found her with her mouth slightly open, her hand curled loosely near the edge of the blanket. She looked peaceful, not lonely. She left me a modest inheritance, more than I'd expected. Alongside it, tucked in an envelope with my name written in soft cursive, was a note. "You made me feel human again. Make yourself feel the same." And just like that, a new kind of door cracked open. The house sat on the edge of town, just past the bend where the road narrows and blackberry bushes crowd the fences. It was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and a sag in the front porch that made it lean like it was tired. But it had bones, solid ones. I could feel it when I pressed my palm against the doorframe the first time. It didn't creak, it waited. I used the inheritance from Lillian, what little savings I'd scraped together from book royalties, and a small community grant I hadn't dared apply for until she told me to stop assuming no. No one else knew I was buying. I didn't mention it on the blog. I didn't call Matt. I didn't call my parents. Some things don't need an audience. Some victories are too quiet for clapping. I moved in on a Thursday, carried boxes by myself, slept on a mattress on the floor for 3 weeks until I could afford a frame, hung curtains that didn't match, painted the kitchen cabinets a color I couldn't name somewhere between green and sorrow. I planted herbs first, then tomatoes, then flowers I couldn't identify but liked the shape of. I fixed what I could and let the rest stay broken in ways that didn't bother me. The floor sloped a little in the hallway, the door to the guest room stuck in winter. It didn't matter. This place wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I didn't post photos. I didn't invite anyone. The few readers who followed my blog just saw more essays pieces about choosing stillness, about learning what silence could give back when it wasn't punishment. I didn't tell them I was finally home. I wasn't ready to use the word. In the drawer beside the fridge, I kept a manila envelope. Inside were copies of the deed insurance papers and a simple letter I wrote to myself on moving day. If they ever come back, it said, remember, they already told you what you were worth. It wasn't bitterness, it was a boundary, one I could touch. They came on a Sunday, just after 11. I was in the backyard trimming rosemary and brushing soil off my knees when I heard the doorbell. Then the soft thud of footsteps, 2 pairs, maybe 3. I didn't check the window. I already knew. By the time I wiped my hands and opened the door, my parents were smiling like nothing had ever been broken. My mother, Mary Ann, held a lattice-top pie in a dish I recognized from her old kitchen. My father, Frank, wore a collared shirt tucked too neatly into pants that didn't quite fit right anymore. "We were just in the area," she said. "Thought we'd stop by." "It's been ages, Claire." I said nothing at first, just stepped aside. They walked in like they'd been invited, like the furniture still remembered them. My father commented on how cozy the living room felt, then opened the fridge without asking. My mother ran her hand across the windowsill and gave a slight nod. She was taking inventory. Then came the folder. Thick, cream-colored, already opened. My father laid it on the kitchen table like it was a gift. Inside were documents, trust forms, medical release drafts, some kind of residential application I didn't recognize at first. "We've been thinking. My mother started this house is lovely, but it's a lot for one person. We've talked to Matt, and well, his place is under construction. His family needs somewhere quiet short-term. It just makes sense." I stood still. "You'd be taken care of course," she added quickly. "There's a lovely senior living co-op just outside Medford. Full staff, gardening space. We already did a tour." Frank tapped the brochure. "All you'd need to do is sign. We've arranged most of the paperwork. Just needs your signature and a couple follow-ups with the notary." I looked at the pen they'd placed beside the folder. I didn't ask them how they found the address. I didn't ask why they came without calling. I didn't ask why, after all this time, they still spoke in terms like logistics and solutions and plans. Instead, I asked one quiet question. "Did you bring coffee?" Mary Ann blinked. "What coffee?" I said again. "You brought a pie. Did you bring coffee to go with it?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. I walked to the cupboard, pulled down a mug, and began to boil the kettle. Their voices buzzed behind me about how it's just temporary, how families help each other, how this is for everyone's benefit. I let them speak. I listened, and I smiled the old smile. The one I used to wear at Matt's award dinners. The one I wore the day they told me I was too much trouble to keep around. The kettle clicked off, and I poured the water. Let them talk. That night, after they left with their pie and their folder and their carefully scripted concerns, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The house was too still, as if it had been holding its breath while they were here. I could feel it exhale through the floorboards. I reached into the drawer by the fridge, not for the deed, not for the envelope labeled "in case," but for something older, something I hadn't touched in over a decade. A letter, cream envelope. My handwriting on the front, their address in the corner. I'd written it 14 years ago from the front seat of a borrowed car parked behind a grocery store too proud to call. The letter was short, just a few lines. I told them I was sorry, that I hadn't meant to embarrass them, that I needed a place to stay just for a week, just until I could get back on my feet. They never opened it. The seal was still intact. I turned it over in my hands, then set it down gently on the table beside their folder of legal arrangements. That was the last time I asked to come home. Now they were asking me to leave mine. I stood and looked around the kitchen. The tile I laid myself, the clock that ticked too fast, the spoon drawer that stuck on the left side. None of it was worth much on paper, but I knew what it had cost. I walked outside into the dark. The soil smelled warm. I bent down near the basil and pressed my fingers into the earth, not for any reason, just to remember what grounding felt like. In the morning, I called the number I usually gave to other women, the legal nonprofit. I explained the situation. They remembered me. I wasn't just a referral voice this time, I was a client. Then I walked next door to see Teresa. She's lived there 7 years, former paralegal, sharp, discreet. We've exchanged tomato seedlings folded mail by mistake. She said yes before I even finished the ask. We made a list that afternoon. Who to notify, what to document, what not to say. I watered the garden again that night, slower than usual. One more line from the letter kept echoing. I won't be a problem. I just need somewhere to land. They had read the envelope but never opened it, and that told me more than any reply ever could. They came back the following weekend. I knew they would. People like them don't handle silence well. It creates too much space for doubt, for losing control. This time they brought Matt. My younger brother stood on the porch like it was an errand. He nodded toward the car where his wife sat, idling, engine running, one kid asleep in the back seat. We're just here to finalize things, he said. I opened the door, smiled like I had on Sunday. Let them in. The house looked the same, but it wasn't. I'd placed a recording device, one of Teresa's, on the shelf behind the sugar jar. Just a simple black button blinking once every few seconds. Another was in my apron pocket already on. My phone sat on the counter screen, off app running. We've got everything here, Matt said, placing a newer folder on the table. Updated documents, just a couple initials and a signature. My father reached into his coat and pulled out a pen, offering it without a word. My mother stood near the hallway, gazing toward the guest room again, like she could already see curtains she'd pick out. We really think this is best for everyone, she said softly. You've done well here, Claire. But don't you think it's time to share what you've built? I didn't answer. Instead, I reached for a small envelope tucked beneath the fruit bowl, opened it carefully, laid its contents on the table one by one. First, a certified letter from a doctor confirming my full mental capacity dated 3 days prior. Next, a printout of state elder exploitation laws highlighted. Then, a notarized statement from Teresa detailing prior comments made during a neighborhood walk, including my mother's remark about getting Claire to sign before she starts asking questions. Matt paled. My father's hand lowered slowly. My mother didn't blink. Finally, I pressed play on my phone. The recording was clear. Her voice. It's just a matter of making her comfortable. Once she's in the facility, we can repaint this place. Maybe do something with the porch. Silence filled the room like smoke. You recorded us, Matt asked. No, I said. You recorded yourselves. I just listened. I stood up, not with drama, just with decision. This house is not a solution. It's not a backup plan, and I'm not furniture you move to make space. They left without closing the front door. Matt was the first to walk out. He didn't say anything, just shook his head like he was the one disappointed. My father followed slower with that look he used to give me at report card nights, as if I'd broken something fragile on purpose. My mother lingered in the doorway, one hand on the frame, the other on her purse strap. "You always needed to prove something," she said. "Not anymore," I answered. The door clicked shut behind them. I locked it. Not out of fear, but finality. Later that week, Teresa helped me finalize the will. We sat at the kitchen table while the garden light shifted across the linoleum. It took 3 signatures and 1 long breath. The house would go someday to a local shelter that helps older women escape financial abuse and coercive control. I added a clause barring direct blood relatives from inheriting it. "Too harsh?" Teresa asked. "No," I said. "Just true." There was no ceremony, no celebratory drink, just the quiet sound of a boundary being drawn and held. I stood in the backyard that evening, the light low and gold. The porch still sagged. The herb bed needed weeding. A bird had pulled thread loose from the screen door. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long, long while, I could say that without apology. The postcard came on a Thursday. No return address, just a drawing of a sunflower hand-colored the sky, a little too green, the petals uneven. Inside, in a careful, slanted scrawl, "Hi, Miss Claire. My mom said thank you." She smiled again. I like when she smiles. "I hope you still have flowers. Love, Ellie." I stood at the mailbox holding that card for longer than I should have. The wind picked up, rustling the rosemary. A bee hovered near the thyme, then drifted away. I didn't cry. I walked inside, opened the old recipe box, blue tin dented corner, still faintly smelling of cinnamon, and slipped the card next to a folded note I hadn't looked at in years, the unopened letter I'd once written to my parents. It didn't hurt to see it anymore. I walked back out to the garden. The soil was soft beneath my soles. Tomatoes climbing wild now, mint escaping its planter. A marigold had bloomed overnight. I trimmed back what needed trimming, let grow what wanted to grow. Some days the quiet feels thick, like a coat that never quite fits. But I wear it anyway, because I know now I didn't vanish. I didn't get erased. Something stayed. Something took root. And in this garden, even silence can bloom. If you've ever been treated like a guest in the life you built, if you've ever stood still while they planned your disappearance, not with cruelty but with convenience, just leave one word below, any word you needed to hear back then. I'll be here to read it.